Anna Reynolds sat in her hospital bed, gripping her phone with trembling hands. The dim fluorescent lights above her flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow on the sterile white walls of the San Diego Medical Center. Pain shot through her abdomen, sharp and unrelenting, like a knife twisting inside her. She winced, her free hand clutching the thin hospital blanket as she tried to steady herself. In the corner of the room, her 2-year-old twins, Lucas and Lily, sat on the floor, stacking plastic blocks into a wobbly tower. They were too young to understand the severity of the situation, too innocent to realize that their mother might not be coming home as soon as they hoped. The beeping of medical monitors was the only sound filling the space until her phone screen lit up. Anna took a deep breath and accepted the video call, bracing herself for the conversation she knew was coming. Her parents, Margaret and Robert Reynolds, appeared on the screen sitting comfortably in their well-lit, festively decorated home. Behind them, a Christmas tree twinkled with golden lights, and faint holiday music played in the background. The sight of it felt like a cruel contrast to the cold, impersonal hospital room Anna was confined to. Before she could even get a word in, her mother, Margaret, let out an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again," she snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. "We've had these Elton John tickets for months." Anna's breath caught in her throat. She had barely been able to ask for help, to swallow her pride and admit she had no one else to turn to. Now, hearing her mother's dismissive tone, she felt her stomach sink. "Mom, please," she managed, her voice strained. "I don't have anyone to watch the kids. The doctors just told me I need emergency surgery. I don't have a choice." Her father, Robert, scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're becoming a real burden, Anna," he said, his expression hardening. "We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without constantly dealing with your problems." Anna felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. For years she had financially supported them, sending them $2,500 a month since they had taken early retirement 3 years ago. Even after losing James, her husband, in a tragic car accident 6 months earlier, she had continued making those payments, stretching herself thin to ensure that her parents lived comfortably. She had never once asked for anything in return. And now, the one time she did, when she was at her most vulnerable, they were telling her she was a nuisance? Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She glanced at her children, still oblivious to the storm brewing between their mother and grandparents. Lucas giggled as he toppled the tower of blocks, while Lily clapped her tiny hands together in delight. They were everything to Anna, and the thought of leaving them alone in this world if something went wrong in surgery terrified her more than anything. "Dad, I'm not asking you to drop everything forever," she pleaded. "Just one night. Just while I'm in surgery. Please, they're your grandchildren." Margaret rolled her eyes, tossing a glance at Robert. "You always do this, Anna. Always expecting everyone to rearrange their lives for you." Robert nodded in agreement. "We've already made plans with Jessica for Christmas Eve. We're going to a nice dinner before the concert. We can't just cancel everything at the last minute, because you didn't plan ahead." Anna felt her heart physically ache at their words. Jessica, her younger sister, had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their parents' eyes. While Anna had spent her childhood being overlooked, Jessica had been lavished with praise and attention. Even now, as a grown woman, Jessica remained their priority. But Anna's children? Their own grandchildren? They didn't even warrant a second thought. The conversation had spiraled beyond anything Anna had anticipated. She had prepared herself for reluctance, maybe even complaints. But she hadn't expected outright cruelty. Hadn't expected them to look at her, their own daughter, bleeding internally and in need of surgery, and act as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. A nurse entered the room then, glancing at the monitors before turning to Anna. "Your vitals are still unstable," she said gently, her gaze flicking to the phone screen. She seemed to immediately sense the tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" Anna barely managed to nod, but Margaret scoffed again. "See? You have hospital staff there. You'll be fine," she said dismissively. Anna had no words left. She simply stared at them, her fingers tightening around the edges of the hospital blanket. There was nothing more to say. They had made their choice. And for the first time in her life, Anna felt something inside her shift. A realization. They were never going to change. No matter how much she sacrificed for them, they would never put her first. Never care for her the way she had cared for them. Margaret sighed dramatically. "Well, I suppose we should go. We're meeting Jessica soon. Hope everything goes well with your little procedure." And with that they hung up. The silence that followed was suffocating. Anna let out a shaky breath, her fingers still curled around her phone. She felt utterly alone. A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her. She looked up to see the nurse, her expression full of sympathy. "I'm Valerie," she said softly, "and I overheard a bit of that conversation. I'm so sorry, Anna." Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know what to do," she admitted. "If something happens to me, my kids, they'll have no one." Valerie squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "You're not alone," she said. "I have a friend, Olivia Carter. She's a professional nanny who specializes in childhood trauma. She used to work at the Children's Hospital before becoming a private nanny. She's amazing with kids." Anna hesitated. "How much would that cost?" she asked, worry creeping into her voice. She already had enough medical bills piling up. "Don't worry about that right now," Valerie said gently. "Let's just focus on getting you through the surgery first." For the first time that night, Anna felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to rely on people who had proven they would never be there for her. Maybe there were still good people in the world, people who genuinely cared. She looked over at Lucas and Lily, her resolve strengthening. "Yes," she whispered. "Please call her." As Valerie stepped out of the room, Anna took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she finally stopped chasing the love and approval of people who would never give it. The moment she chose herself and her children over anyone else. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt something new. Not fear. Not grief. Freedom. Anna lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling as the steady hum of medical equipment filled the room. The painkillers dulled the worst of the discomfort, but a dull ache still lingered in her abdomen, a constant reminder of the emergency surgery she had just undergone. The room was quiet except for the soft murmuring of her 2-year-old twins, Lucas and Lily, playing in the corner. They were blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside their mother. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table. She knew who it was before even looking. A deep breath steadied her as she picked it up. The screen was filled with missed calls and unread messages from her parents. She knew what they would say even before she opened them. The first messages were demanding and indignant. They were upset, not about her condition, but about what they called her rash decision. Canceling their financial support, they said, was selfish and unfair. They reminded her of the sacrifices they had made for her over the years, as if their past efforts entitled them to a lifetime of dependence on her. Her father's message was particularly cutting, accusing her of acting out of spite rather than practicality. As the day went on, their messages shifted in tone. The entitlement gave way to anger, and when she still didn't respond, desperation. They told her they were struggling without her help, that their mortgage was coming due, that they had already canceled their cruise. The irony of it all made Anna laugh bitterly. They had ignored her suffering, dismissed her as a burden when she begged for help, and now they expected her to be concerned about their inconveniences. 3 years ago, when they had retired early, she had stepped in to support them financially, sending them $2,500 every month to help cover their mortgage and expenses. She had done it out of a sense of duty, out of love, out of the belief that family takes care of one another. Even after James died and she was left alone to raise 2 children, she had continued to send them money without hesitation. It had never even occurred to her to stop, but now everything had changed. The moment she had canceled the automatic payment, a weight had lifted from her chest. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to their demands. She was making a choice for herself. She wasn't their provider anymore. She wasn't their safety net. She had spent her entire life trying to earn their approval, and she saw now that it had all been in vain. Lucas and Lily giggled as they knocked over their tower of blocks, oblivious to the shift happening in their mother's heart. Anna watched them, her grip tightening around the phone. They deserved better than this. They deserved to grow up in a home filled with love and security, not one where their mother was constantly drained by people who took without giving anything in return. Her parents' final messages arrived late in the evening. They were no longer trying to convince her, now they were blaming her. They said she was turning her back on family, that she would regret this decision. Her mother accused her of being heartless, of punishing them over a misunderstanding. But there had been no misunderstanding. When Anna had needed them the most, they had made their choice clear. Setting the phone down, she closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. She had spent years being the responsible one, the dependable one, the daughter who always showed up. It had cost her so much, her time, her energy, her peace of mind. But she had finally drawn the line. A quiet knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Valerie, the nurse who had been caring for her since she arrived at the hospital, stepped inside with a gentle smile. She had already done so much, more than Anna's own parents had. She had arranged for Olivia, a professional nanny, to care for Lucas and Lily while Anna recovered. She had offered kindness when Anna had felt utterly alone. There was still a long road ahead. Recovery wouldn't be easy, and neither would adjusting to this new reality without her parents in her life. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had made her decision, and she would stand by it. As the lights in the hospital dimmed for the night, Anna finally let herself rest. The old weight of obligation was gone. In its place was something new, relief. The messages from her parents stopped for a day, and for a brief moment, Anna allowed herself to believe that they had finally accepted her decision. But by the next morning, a new storm had begun, one she should have seen coming. Her phone buzzed relentlessly as she sat at the kitchen table, watching Lucas and Lily eat their breakfast. At first, she ignored it, sipping her now lukewarm coffee while listening to their excited babbling. But when she glanced at the screen, her stomach tightened. A new message thread had appeared in a family group chat she had barely used in years. The sender was her father, Robert. The message, long and dramatic, accused her of abandoning her parents in their time of need. He painted her as an ungrateful daughter who had been financially supported and emotionally nurtured her whole life, only to turn her back on them without warning. He told the family that they were now on the verge of losing their home because of Anna's selfishness. Her mother, Margaret, chimed in soon after, adding that they had sacrificed everything for Anna, only to be cruelly discarded. Anna stared at the screen in disbelief. She shouldn't have been surprised. They had spent her entire life manipulating the truth to make themselves look like victims. But seeing it written out so boldly for the entire family to read was infuriating. They had twisted the story so completely that anyone who didn't know the full truth might actually believe them. The worst part was that Jessica, her younger sister, had already responded. "Oh my God, Anna, is this true?" Anna closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to stay calm. Jessica had always been their favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. Their parents had conditioned her to believe whatever they said without question. Unlike Anna, Jessica had never been forced to see the reality of who they truly were. Taking a steadying breath, Anna typed back, "No, it's not true. I almost died in emergency surgery. They refused to watch Lucas and Lily because they had concert tickets. When I told them I had no one else, they called me a burden. That's why I cut them off. They've been living off my money for years, and I finally stopped paying for their luxury lifestyle. Now they're trying to manipulate everyone into feeling sorry for them." The chat went silent for a long time. Anna watched as the three little dots appeared next to Jessica's name, disappeared, then reappeared. She could almost hear the gears turning in her sister's head. The internal struggle between what she had been told her whole life and the undeniable truth Anna had just laid out for her. Finally, Jessica responded, "I didn't know. They told me you were overreacting about a minor procedure. I would have watched the kids if I had known." Anna felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at her parents for lying, relief that Jessica was finally questioning them, and exhaustion from the constant battle of proving herself. But before she could respond, another message popped up. It was from their cousin Michael. "Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last summer? And Aunt Margaret, weren't you showing off a new diamond bracelet at Thanksgiving? If you guys are struggling so much, maybe you should sell some of that first before blaming Anna." Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Michael had always been one of the few family members who saw through their parents' act, but she hadn't expected him to jump in so publicly. The message seemed to crack something open, because suddenly, other relatives began responding as well. Aunt Linda. "Wait, I thought they retired early because they had enough savings. Why were they relying on Anna this whole time?" A cousin Rachel. "Anna has 2 toddlers and just lost her husband. Why was she the one paying for everything?" A Uncle Dan. "This is ridiculous. You guys have been on vacations every year. Now you're suddenly broke." Anna read through the flood of responses, her pulse racing. The tide was turning. Her parents had been so sure that they could control the narrative, that they could paint Anna as the villain and get everyone to pressure her into resuming her financial support. But they had underestimated how much people were paying attention. Jessica, still processing everything, sent Anna a private message. "I just called Mom and Dad. They completely avoided my questions about the surgery and kept saying you're punishing them. I don't know what to think anymore." Anna hesitated before replying. "Think about what they did, not what they're saying now. When I needed them, they didn't show up. When they needed me, I did for years. And when I finally said no, they turned the whole family against me." Jessica didn't respond right away. But the next day, she sent another message. "I just checked their finances. They took out a second mortgage to buy that boat. They've been spending money like they assumed you'd always be there to cover them. I had no idea how bad it was." Anna wasn't surprised, but she still felt the sting of betrayal. They had never even tried to be responsible because they had always seen her as their safety net. Her parents, realizing that their plan was backfiring, began sending her private messages. The shift in tone was immediate. They were no longer demanding or angry. They were pleading. They told her they never expected things to get so out of control, that they had just been frustrated and desperate. They asked her to reconsider, even just for a few more months, so they could adjust. But Anna knew better. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry that it hadn't worked. She ignored their messages. By the end of the week, the family group chat had gone completely silent. The extended family had come to their own conclusions, and for the first time in her life, Anna didn't feel like she was standing alone. She had spent so many years believing that if she just did more, if she just worked harder, she could finally earn their love and respect. But love that had to be earned wasn't real. She had given them everything, her money, her time, her emotional energy. And in return, they had abandoned her when she needed them most. But she wasn't their victim anymore. She was free. The silence from her parents didn't last long. After their failed attempt to turn the family against her, Anna knew it was only a matter of time before they reached out again. When they did, the tone of their messages had changed. The accusations and anger had faded, replaced by something else, desperation. At first, the messages were subtle, small hints about how they were adjusting to life without her support. Then, as their situation worsened, Their words became more urgent. They told her they were struggling to make their mortgage payments, that their savings were running out faster than expected. They reminded her of the years they had spent raising her, of everything they had done for her, of the sacrifices they had made. But the weight of their words had lost its power. Anna had spent too long shouldering the burden they placed on her. She had carried them financially, emotionally, and mentally for years. Now she had finally put it down, and she had no intention of picking it back up. The real turning point came when Jessica called. Their parents had received a foreclosure notice, giving them 60 days to catch up on their mortgage or lose the house. They had been avoiding real financial changes, still holding on to the belief that Anna would change her mind and rescue them. They had been trying to sell the timeshare but hadn't received any good offers. The boat, which could have provided much-needed relief, remained untouched. Their father refused to sell it, claiming they would take too much of a loss. It was astonishing to Anna that even as their financial situation unraveled, they were unwilling to let go of their luxuries. They had relied on her support for so long that they still refused to believe it was gone for good. Even now, they were waiting for her to step in at the last minute, to be the dutiful daughter they had always expected her to be. A few days later, they showed up at her apartment unannounced. Through the peephole, she saw them standing in the hallway, stiff and uncomfortable. Her mother clutched her expensive purse, while her father's expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his posture. She could have ignored them, let them stand there until they gave up, but something in her wanted to face them. She wanted to look them in the eyes and let them see that she was no longer the person they could manipulate. When she opened the door, they wasted no time getting to the point. There was no inquiry about how she was recovering, no concern about Lucas and Lily. Their focus was singular: they needed money. Their mortgage was overdue, and they had used what was left of their savings to cover the most recent payment. They spoke as if this were a crisis she was obligated to solve, as if it were unthinkable that she would refuse. Anna listened, her hands steady at her sides. They had lived for years believing they were entitled to her help. The reality of their situation had yet to fully sink in for them. They framed the loss of her financial support as unfair, as though she had taken something from them rather than simply reclaiming what had always been hers. When she told them again with finality that she was done, her mother insisted that they had come to rely on that money, that she couldn't just pull it away so suddenly. Her father accused her of punishing them over one mistake. The weight of their words did not land as they expected. Anna had spent years being the one to bend, to sacrifice, to carry more than her share of responsibility. Now she saw things with complete clarity. This was not punishment. It was the natural consequence of their choices. They had assumed they could always depend on her, and now they were being forced to stand on their own. She shut the door, leaving them to face that truth. The next day they returned, bringing Aunt Linda with them. Their attempt at mediation. Her aunt's voice carried through the door as she pleaded with Anna to listen, saying that her parents were truly struggling, that they didn't know what to do. But Anna had already given them the solution. Sell the boat, downsize, adjust their lifestyle. They refused to do any of those things. Instead, they wanted her to fix it for them. Her aunt hesitated when Anna explained everything: the surgery, the rejection, the way they had refused to help when she was in the hospital. She had been told an entirely different story, one where Anna had overreacted, where she had cut them off for no reason. The truth left her silent. For the first time, someone in the family saw the manipulation for what it was. The messages from her parents slowed after that. Jessica, after reviewing their finances, confirmed what Anna had suspected. They had never planned for this situation because they never believed they would have to. They had taken out a second mortgage without thinking about long-term consequences. They had spent freely, assuming she would always be there to cover them. Now reality had caught up with them. A month later, Jessica called again. Their parents had finally sold the house, moving into a smaller condo. Their father had reluctantly sold the boat, though he continued to complain about it. They were not destitute, but they were bitter. They still framed themselves as victims, telling anyone who would listen that Anna had abandoned them. Jessica sounded exhausted when she told her this, frustrated by their refusal to take accountability. But for Anna it no longer mattered. Let them tell their story however they wanted. The truth remained the same. She had given them everything, her money, her time, her energy. And when she had needed them the most, they had shown her exactly where she stood. Now she was free. The weeks following her parents' departure were quieter than Anna had anticipated. After years of shouldering their burdens, the absence of their demands left a strange emptiness, but it was not an unwelcome one. Instead of feeling lost, she felt something new, possibility. Without the constant drain of supporting them, she had room to breathe. The money that had once gone to their mortgage remained in her account, untouched. For the first time in years, she could make decisions based on what was best for herself and her children, rather than out of obligation. The realization was both freeing and overwhelming. She had spent so long prioritizing others that she wasn't sure how to focus on her own needs. The first step was ensuring she had reliable help. Olivia, the nanny Valerie had introduced her to, quickly became an essential part of her life. Olivia was warm and patient, with a background in childhood trauma that made her particularly attuned to the twins' needs. Lucas and Lily had taken to her immediately, their trust in her growing with each passing day. Knowing they were safe and cared for allowed Anna to focus on her recovery, both physically and emotionally. As the days turned into weeks, Anna also found support in a place she hadn't expected: a group for young widows. Valerie had suggested it, mentioning that many women in the group had gone through similar struggles. At first, Anna had been hesitant. The idea of sitting in a circle, rehashing her grief, felt unbearable. But attending the first meeting changed everything. The group wasn't just about grief, it was about survival. These women understood her in a way no one else could. They had faced the same lonely nights, the same fear of raising children without a partner, the same struggle to rebuild after loss. In their stories she found echoes of her own pain, but also a glimpse of what was possible. They weren't just surviving, they were creating new lives for themselves. One woman, Diana, had lost her husband to cancer 2 years earlier. She had been left with a 3-year-old son and a mountain of debt, but she had slowly rebuilt her life. She now worked as a real estate agent, helping single parents find homes that fit their needs. Her resilience inspired Anna, and as they talked more, an idea began to form. James had always been the one who helped people process their emotions. He had been the one to offer comfort, to remind people of the importance of remembering their loved ones. When he died, Anna had struggled to find a way to honor his memory. Now, sitting across from Diana, she realized she could use her skills to do something meaningful. That night, she opened her laptop and started designing a memorial website service. She had built one for James after his passing, a space where friends and family could share memories, photos, and stories. Now she wanted to offer the same to others. People grieving needed a place to hold on to the ones they had lost, and Anna knew she could help provide that. As she worked late into the night, she felt something stir inside her. Not just grief, but purpose. The changes in her life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. With her finances no longer drained by her parents, she began looking for a new place to live. Her small apartment had always felt temporary, a place she had settled into when she and James had first started their family. Now it no longer felt like a home. She wanted something more stable, somewhere her children could grow without the weight of old memories pressing down on them. Diana helped her navigate the housing market, and within a month, Anna found a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it had a backyard, a space where Lucas and Lily could run and play. When she signed the final papers, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. This was hers. Not something she was maintaining for someone else, not something she was sacrificing for, but something she had built for herself and her children. Jessica had started visiting more often, her guilt over their parents' actions lingering in every conversation. At first, their interactions were cautious, the wounds between them still fresh. But over time the dynamic began to shift. Without their parents' influence, they were able to talk openly for the first time in years. Jessica admitted that she had spent much of her life believing their parents' version of things, never questioning why Anna always seemed to be on the outside. Seeing how their parents had treated Anna during her surgery had shattered that illusion. She started making an effort, not out of obligation but because she genuinely wanted to. She babysat the twins on weekends, bringing over meals and spending time with them in the backyard. She asked about Anna's business, offering to help spread the word among her own friends and colleagues. Slowly, the resentment that had once stood between them was replaced by something new: understanding. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the twins chase fireflies, Jessica turned to her with an uncertain expression. "I know I can't change the past," she said, "but I want to be better. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Anna didn't hesitate before answering. "I want that too." Their parents had spent years turning them against each other, but without them in the middle, they were finally able to see each other clearly. Jessica had been a product of their upbringing, just as Anna had. The difference was that now she was choosing to break free from it. Anna's life wasn't perfect, but it was finally hers. The grief of losing James would never fully disappear, but it no longer consumed her. She was building something new, something strong, something lasting. She had Olivia to help with the twins, a business that gave her purpose, a home that belonged only to her, and a sister who was learning how to truly be there. For so long, she had been surrounded by people who took from her without giving anything in return. Now she was surrounded by people who showed up. The weight of obligation was gone. In its place, she had something she had never truly felt before: support. 6 months had passed since Anna had last heard from her parents. The silence, at first unsettling, had gradually become a source of peace. She no longer lived under the weight of their expectations, nor did she feel the constant pull of guilt to take responsibility for their choices. Without them in her life, she had been able to focus on her own healing and on creating a better future for Lucas and Lily. One afternoon, as she sorted through the mail, she noticed an envelope with familiar handwriting. Her mother's cursive script stood out against the plain paper, and for a long moment she simply stared at it. A letter was the last thing she had expected. Her parents had always preferred immediate demands: phone calls, visits, guilt-laden messages. The fact that her mother had taken the time to write made Anna pause. Sitting at her kitchen table, she opened the letter carefully, uncertain of what she would find. The words inside were different from the ones she had prepared herself for. There were no accusations, no attempts to twist the story, no demands for financial support. Instead, it was an apology. Her mother admitted that for years, she had resented Anna's independence. She had seen it as a rejection, had felt threatened by the way Anna had built a life that didn't revolve around them. She confessed that the decision not to help during Anna's surgery had been selfish, though at the time, she had convinced herself otherwise. The months since had forced her to see the truth: how much they had depended on Anna, how little they had given in return, and how devastating it was to realize that she had finally walked away. Anna read the letter twice, searching for hidden manipulation, for signs that this was just another attempt to reel her back in. But there were none. Her mother's words were raw and unguarded, admitting faults that she had never acknowledged before. It was the kind of reflection Anna had wished for her entire life, but now that it was in front of her, she wasn't sure how to feel. A day later, Jessica called. Her voice was hesitant, as if she was debating whether to share what she had learned. Their father had suffered a health scare a few weeks prior, collapsing at the hardware store due to high blood pressure. He had been taken to the hospital, where doctors warned him that he needed to change his lifestyle. The incident had shaken him more than anything else ever had. Jessica explained that since then, their parents had been different, quieter, more reflective. They had started therapy, something neither of them had ever considered before. Hearing about her father's health stirred something deep inside Anna. She had spent months detaching from them, learning to live without their presence in her life. Yet the thought of her father lying in a hospital bed still brought an ache she couldn't ignore. He had always carried himself as though nothing could touch him, but now, for the first time, he was facing his own vulnerability. A week later, another letter arrived. This time it was from her father. His words were measured, careful, as if writing them had taken effort. He admitted that he had spent much of his life believing that respect was something owed to him, rather than something he had to earn. He acknowledged the ways in which he had failed her, not just during her surgery, but in all the years before it. His letter did not ask for forgiveness. He simply wanted her to know that he understood why she had made the choices she had. The weight of both letters sat heavily with Anna. She had spent so many years yearning for this, for an acknowledgement of what she had endured, for proof that they truly saw her. Now that she had it, she wasn't sure if it changed anything. The anger had begun to fade, but the wounds remained. An apology, no matter how sincere, did not erase the years of neglect. Weeks passed before she made a decision. She wasn't ready to forgive them, but she was willing to meet them. When she told Jessica, her sister immediately offered to come with her. They met at a small cafe near Anna's new home. Her parents were already seated when she arrived, their posture more hesitant than she had ever seen. The arrogance that had once defined them was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Her mother looked older, her father quieter. There was no immediate attempt to justify their past actions, no defensiveness in their expressions. They spoke carefully, as though aware that one wrong word could cause Anna to leave. They told her about the changes they had made, about how they had been forced to sell their house and downsize. They spoke about therapy, about how much they had resisted it at first, and how difficult it had been to face truths they had long ignored. For the first time, they acknowledged the full extent of what they had done to her. There were no excuses, no shifting of blame. They admitted to their mistakes, to their selfishness, to the ways they had prioritized themselves over her when she needed them most. Her father, for the first time in her life, spoke to her without expectation. He admitted that he had spent years assuming that she would always be there, that her loyalty to family would outweigh everything else. Losing her, even temporarily, had forced him to confront the reality of who he had become. Near the end of the conversation, he mentioned Lucas and Lily. He expressed a desire to know them, to be part of their lives, though he made no demands. He simply said that he hoped one day there would be room for them in her family again. Anna considered this carefully. She had built a home without them, a life that no longer revolved around seeking their approval. Her children had never felt their absence, had never known the pain of being an afterthought. If her parents wanted to be part of their lives, it would not be on the same terms as before. They would have to prove through their actions that they had changed. As she left the cafe, Jessica walked beside her in silence. After a few moments, she spoke quietly, saying that she believed their parents were sincere. Anna wasn't sure. She had spent too many years hoping they would change, only to be disappointed. But this time she wasn't placing any expectations on them. She had already built her life without them. Whether they changed or not, that life would continue. For the first time she was truly free. Anna had spent years imagining what it would feel like to finally hear her parents acknowledge the harm they had done. She had pictured moments of confrontation, where she would lay out every wrong they had committed, every way they had failed her, and they would have no choice but to accept it. But now, standing outside the small cafe where she had agreed to meet them, she felt none of the anger she had once carried so heavily. Instead, there was only a quiet resolve. She wasn't here for closure. She wasn't here to mend things. She was here to listen, to observe, to decide for herself if this was something she wanted to allow back into her life. Inside, her parents were already seated at a table in the corner, looking smaller than she had ever seen them. Her father, once so proud and imposing, sat hunched over, staring down at his hands. Her mother's usual polished appearance was subdued, her expression hesitant rather than expectant. They looked up as she approached, relief flickering in their eyes. Anna slid into the chair across from them without a word. For a moment there was silence. The weight of all that had been left unsaid filled the space between them. It was her father who spoke first, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. He admitted without pretense that he had failed her. He acknowledged that he had spent years treating her as an obligation rather than a daughter, that he had assumed she would always be there, no matter how little he gave in return. Then to Anna's shock he cried. She had never seen her father cry before. He had always been a man of control, someone who saw displays of emotion as weakness. But now his shoulders shook, his hands clenched as though he were struggling to hold himself together. Her mother reached for his hand, and for the first time, Anna saw something in them she had never seen before, true remorse. Not regret for their own circumstances, not sadness over losing her financial support, but a deep understanding of what they had done. Anna let them speak, listening as they described the past few months. They talked about the difficult adjustments, the slow realization of how much they had taken for granted. They admitted to the things they had refused to see, the way they had pushed her aside whenever it was convenient for them. They told her about therapy, about the painful truths it had forced them to confront, the way it had exposed patterns in their behavior that they had long ignored. But Anna had heard apologies before. She had heard promises, seen regret, witnessed moments of self-awareness that had ultimately led nowhere. This time she wouldn't be swayed by words alone. She let them finish, allowing their confessions to settle between them before she spoke. She told them that she wasn't ready to forgive, that she didn't know if she ever would be. Their faces fell, but they didn't argue. She explained calmly that if they wanted to be part of her life, it would be on her terms. That trust, once broken, could not simply be rebuilt overnight. She told them that she would never expose her children to the toxicity she had grown up with. That Lucas and Lily would not have grandparents who made them feel like afterthoughts, who used love as a bargaining tool. If they wanted to know their grandchildren, if they wanted any kind of relationship with her, they would have to prove through actions, not words, that they had changed. Her father nodded, wiping at his eyes. Her mother's gaze was full of unspoken things, of a longing she wasn't sure how to express. But for the first time they both seemed to understand that this was not something they could demand. Anna stood, signaling the end of the conversation. As she walked toward the door, her mother's voice stopped her. It was quiet, hesitant. "Do you think someday we'll get there?" Anna turned, meeting her mother's gaze. "I don't know," she admitted. And then she left. She didn't feel lighter. There was no dramatic sense of relief, no catharsis in finally facing them. But there was clarity. She had spent her life chasing something that had never truly existed, a version of her parents that she had longed for, rather than the people they actually were. Now she no longer needed them to be anything other than what they were. Whether or not they changed, she would be fine. She had already built a life without them, and she wasn't looking back. For the first time in her life, Anna no longer felt the need to look over her shoulder. The weight that had once pressed down on her, the endless need for validation, had finally lifted. She wasn't waiting for her parents to change, wasn't hoping for a moment of redemption that would somehow undo the years of neglect. She had accepted the truth. She didn't need their approval. She never had. Her days no longer revolved around checking her phone for their messages, anticipating their guilt-tripping or manipulative pleas. Instead, her mornings were filled with the laughter of Lucas and Lily, their tiny feet padding across the wooden floors of their new home. Moving into the house had been one of the best decisions she had ever made. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hers. The backyard, a small but vibrant space, had quickly become the twins' favorite place. They spent hours chasing each other through the grass, playing in the dirt, their laughter ringing through the air like music. Anna found herself smiling more than she had in years. Her work had also taken on new meaning. What had started as a small side project, designing memorial websites, had quickly grown into something more. Word had spread among the widow support group, and soon, people outside of it were reaching out, asking for her help in creating spaces to honor their loved ones. Each project reminded her of James, of the website she had built for him in the months after his passing. But instead of the crushing grief she had once associated with those memories, there was now a quiet peace. In helping others preserve their memories, she was also preserving the best parts of her own. Her financial situation, once a constant source of stress, had stabilized. Without the $2,500 monthly drain to her parents, she had been able to rebuild her emergency fund, pay off lingering medical bills, and even start setting aside money for the twins' future. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was planning ahead. She had a support system now, one built on real care and mutual respect rather than obligation. Olivia had become more than just a nanny. She was a trusted friend, someone Anna could rely on without fear of hidden motives. Jessica, too, had continued to prove herself. Their relationship was still healing, but the bond between them was stronger than it had ever been. Jessica showed up, not because she felt guilty, but because she genuinely wanted to be part of Anna's life. It was a stark contrast to what Anna had grown up believing about family. She had been raised to think that family was something you endured, that love was transactional, that relationships had to be maintained out of duty rather than genuine connection. But now she understood that true family was chosen. It was the people who showed up without being asked, who supported you without expecting something in return. Her parents still sent occasional letters. They were different from the ones they had sent in the past. There were no more demands, no more veiled manipulations. Instead, they spoke about their lives, their attempts to change, their slow acceptance of the consequences of their choices. They never asked for money again. They never tried to guilt her into responding. Anna read them, but she never felt compelled to write back. Forgiveness, she had realized, wasn't something she owed them. It was something she could choose to give if and when she was ready. And right now she wasn't. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't waiting for justice, for some moment where they would suffer enough to make up for what they had done. She had simply let go. Letting go didn't mean opening the door again. It didn't mean pretending that their past actions hadn't shaped her. It meant choosing herself, choosing peace, choosing a life where she was no longer bound by their expectations. One evening, as she sat on the back porch watching Lucas and Lily chase fireflies, she thought about the version of herself from a year ago. The woman who had still been tethered to people who didn't value her, who had sacrificed herself over and over again for people who never reciprocated. She wasn't that woman anymore. She had survived loss. She had survived abandonment. She had survived breaking free from a family that had never truly been a safe place. And now she was living. As Lucas crawled into her lap, pressing his small head against her chest, and Lily giggled as she tried to catch another firefly in her tiny hands, Anna felt something settle deep within her. Peace. Not the fleeting kind. Not the temporary relief that came from avoiding conflict, but real lasting peace. For the first time in her life she was free. It had been over a year since Anna last saw her parents. A year of peace, of rebuilding, of learning how to exist without their demands weighing on her. She had believed that part of her life was over, that they had accepted the consequences of their choices. But as she stood by the window, watching their car idling at the curb, she realized how naive that thought had been. Even from a distance she could see the difference in them. Margaret sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her posture lacking its usual confidence, while Robert gripped the steering wheel, his face drawn and weary. The arrogance they once carried was gone. They looked smaller somehow, as if the world had finally forced them to bend. Anna's phone vibrated on the table behind her. She knew without looking that it was them. For days the messages had been coming, first careful, then urgent. They had lost everything. They needed to talk. They had nowhere else to turn. A soft giggle pulled her attention back into the room. Lucas and Lily sat on the floor, stacking blocks, blissfully unaware of the turmoil unfolding just beyond their home. They had never known what it was to be unwanted, to be treated as an afterthought. Anna had worked hard to ensure they never would. The knocking at the door was hesitant, nothing like the entitled demands of the past. She hesitated, then exhaled slowly before opening it. Her parents stood there, looking at her with uncertainty she had never seen before. They were thinner, older, stripped of the wealth and comfort that had once defined them. Margaret spoke first, her voice quiet and careful. They had lost the rental. The payments had been too much, and everything had unraveled faster than they had anticipated. Robert had taken a part-time job at a hardware store, but it wasn't enough. They had tried to hold things together, but it hadn't worked. Anna listened without reacting. There was no anger left in her, no urge to lash out or demand explanations. Only a cold, steady understanding that they had brought this upon themselves. They had spent years assuming she would always be there to catch them, that her sense of duty would override everything else. They had believed, right up until the moment she walked away, that she never truly would. She asked them what they wanted. They hesitated before admitting the truth. They wanted another chance. Not just at financial help, but at being in her life, in her children's lives. They knew they had made mistakes, but they were trying. They just needed her to let them back in. Anna said nothing at first. There was a time when she would have given in without hesitation, when the sight of her father looking humbled or her mother speaking softly would have cracked something inside her. But that time was long gone. Later that evening, Jessica came over. She had known about their parents' situation for weeks but hadn't known how to tell Anna. They had been too proud to ask for help at first, but as things worsened they had turned to her, hoping she could help them figure out what to do. The condo had been too expensive. The rental they had moved into was supposed to be temporary, but they hadn't been able to keep up with the payments. They had sold most of what they owned, but it hadn't been enough. Without Anna's financial support, they had nothing to fall back on. Robert had been forced to take whatever job he could find. Margaret, having spent years defining herself by comfort and status, struggled without the life she had always known. She had never learned how to live without money. Without it, she was lost. Jessica had tried to guide them, but it hadn't been enough. Their parents still hadn't fully accepted the reality of their situation. Even now, even after everything, they were waiting, hoping that Anna would step in and make things right again. Anna listened, but her feelings didn't change. She didn't doubt that they were struggling. She didn't even doubt that they regretted what they had done. But regret wasn't the same as change. Regret could be rooted in suffering, in missing what had been lost. True change requires something deeper. She asked Jessica if she thought they had truly changed. Jessica hesitated before answering. They were different, she admitted, but she didn't know if that difference was because they had finally understood their mistakes or because they had no other choice. That was the real question, wasn't it? People could feel remorse over their circumstances, over the loss of comfort and control. But that wasn't the same as taking responsibility. That wasn't the same as growing. Anna sat with that thought long after Jessica left. Her parents had assumed she would always be there. They had built their lives around that assumption. Now, without her, they were lost. And suddenly, when they had no other options, they wanted back in. The person she used to be would have seen this as a chance for healing. She would have let them in, hoping that this time things would be different. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had spent too long waiting for them to see her, to choose her, to treat her as if she mattered. Now, when it was far too late, they finally wanted to. But she didn't need them to. She had built a life without them. A life filled with people who loved her without conditions. She had learned what it was to feel safe, to feel valued. Whether her parents had changed or not, she had already moved on. That night, as she sat in bed listening to the soft sounds of Lucas and Lily breathing in the next room, she realized she had made her decision long before they ever knocked on her door. She wasn't going to let them back in. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because she had finally learned that some doors were meant to stay closed. Anna agreed to meet them, but only on her terms. She chose a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where she wouldn't be surrounded by familiar faces, where she could keep this meeting separate from the life she had built. She arrived early, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, giving herself time to settle before they arrived. Her parents walked in 10 minutes later. They looked around hesitantly before spotting her, moving toward the table with careful steps, as if afraid she might disappear. Margaret was dressed simply, a stark contrast to the designer clothes she had once worn so effortlessly. Robert's usual authoritative posture had softened, his eyes carrying exhaustion rather than their usual sharpness. They looked like people who had been through something, people who had lost more than they had ever imagined. They sat across from her, the silence stretching between them. For once, they weren't trying to control the conversation. They were waiting for her to speak first. Anna took a slow breath before looking at them, her expression unreadable. She asked them why they were really here, what it was they expected from her. Her father shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat before admitting they weren't sure. They wanted to try to make things right, but they didn't know how. They just knew that they had lost her, and they didn't want that to be permanent. The words meant little without actions to back them up. Anna leaned forward, her tone calm but firm as she reminded them of the moment everything had changed. She painted the picture for them. The hospital bed, the pain twisting in her abdomen, the weight of uncertainty pressing on her as she faced the reality of emergency surgery alone. She reminded them of the phone call, of how they had dismissed her, called her a burden, refused to watch Lucas and Lily for a single night because their plans were more important. Margaret's face crumpled as she looked down at the table, her hands clenched together. Robert, for the first time, didn't try to defend himself. He didn't shift the blame, didn't attempt to justify their choices. Instead, he lowered his head, his voice cracking as he admitted he had been wrong. Anna had never seen her father cry before. Not once in her entire life. He had always been composed, unyielding, a man who believed vulnerability was a weakness. But now, sitting across from her, the weight of his failures finally seemed to press down on him. His shoulders trembled slightly, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was raw in a way she had never heard before. He told her that he had always assumed she would be there. That no matter what happened, she would never truly leave them behind. He admitted that he had taken her for granted, that he had convinced himself that she didn't need him the way Jessica did. So he had never prioritized her. And when she finally did need him, when she was at her most vulnerable, he had failed her in the worst possible way. Margaret spoke next, her voice quieter, hesitant. She didn't try to explain away her choices or ask for understanding. Instead, she admitted that she had spent much of her life defining herself by status, by comfort, by the belief that she deserved ease and luxury. She confessed that she had never thought about what that had cost her, had never considered what it meant to push away the people who truly mattered. Losing everything had forced her to see herself in a way she never had before, and she didn't like what she saw. Anna listened, absorbing their words, measuring them against the years of neglect, the countless times they had dismissed her. She could feel the weight of their regret, but regret alone wasn't enough. She told them as much. They could be sorry. They could wish they had done things differently. But that didn't mean she could forget the years of being treated like an afterthought, of being used until she had nothing left to give. Her father nodded slowly, as if he had already known that would be her answer. Margaret's voice wavered as she asked if there was a way forward, if there was any path that led to healing. Anna exhaled, considering her response carefully. She told them she wasn't sure, that she didn't know if she could ever truly forgive them, and that even if she did, forgiveness didn't mean she could let them back into her life the way they wanted. They looked stricken but didn't argue. She continued, telling them that if they wanted to be part of her life, they had to prove it through actions, not words. She wouldn't accept empty apologies. She wouldn't fall into the cycle of false promises and temporary change. And under no circumstances would she let them near her children until she was absolutely certain they were different people. Lucas and Lily had never known the kind of neglect Anna had grown up with, and she would not allow even the smallest chance of them experiencing it. They deserved better than conditional love, better than family who only showed up when it was convenient. Her mother flinched, as if the thought of being kept from her grandchildren physically hurt. Her father simply nodded, accepting the boundary without resistance. For the first time they understood they no longer had control over her. She made it clear that she would not be responsible for fixing their lives. She had carried them for years, had sacrificed her own well-being to ensure they had everything they wanted, and she would never do that again. If they wanted to build something new, they had to do it on their own. Margaret wiped at her eyes, her voice thick as she acknowledged that they had relied on her for far too long. She admitted that they had assumed she would always be there to clean up their mistakes, to catch them when they fell. They had never prepared for a life without her support, because they had never believed she would take it away. Robert sat in silence for a long time before speaking. He told her he understood why she had cut them off, why she had chosen herself and her children over them. And though it hurt, he respected it. That was the closest thing to acceptance she had ever received from him. She stood, signaling that the conversation was over. They didn't protest, didn't beg for more time. They rose from their seats, looking smaller than ever. Before they left, Margaret looked at her one last time, voice hesitant as she asked if there was hope. If one day things could be different. Anna didn't answer right away. Then finally she spoke softly but with certainty. "I don't know." It was the only honest answer she could give. As she watched them walk away, she didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt she once might have. She didn't feel regret or sorrow. She felt steady, clear at peace. She had set her boundaries. Whether they changed or not was up to them, but she had already made her choice. She had built a life without them, and whether they earned a place in it again was no longer her burden to carry. Anna watched as her parents exchanged a look, uncertainty heavy in their expressions. For the first time in their lives, they didn't know what to do. They had always operated under the assumption that no matter what happened, Anna would be there to catch them, to solve the problems they created. Now, faced with the reality of their choices, they looked lost. Her father shifted uncomfortably before finally asking the question she had known was coming. What were they supposed to do now? It was a question she had spent years answering for them, a burden she had carried without question. But that weight no longer belonged to her. She let the silence linger before responding. This time they would have to figure it out themselves. There was no solution she could offer them. No way to erase the damage they had done or undo the decisions that had led them here. They had spent a lifetime relying on her, expecting her to sacrifice her own well-being for their comfort. That expectation had ended the day she chose herself. Her mother nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of Anna's words. There was no fight left in her, no last attempt to change the outcome. Perhaps she had already realized there was nothing more she could say. Jessica sat quietly, watching the conversation unfold. She had positioned herself somewhere between them all, trying to mediate, to find a way forward without taking sides. It was a difficult place to be, caught between loyalty and truth, but Anna appreciated that Jessica no longer blindly defended them. She had finally seen the reality of who their parents were, and that was enough. As the meeting ended, her parents rose from their seats, looking smaller than they ever had before. They didn't ask for another chance. They didn't beg her to reconsider. They had come seeking forgiveness, but they had been met with boundaries instead. Jessica remained seated as their parents walked away. When they were gone, she let out a slow breath, breaking the silence with quiet resignation. She wasn't sure if they had really changed. Neither was Anna. But the difference now was that it no longer mattered. In the following weeks, her parents respected the distance she had set. They sent occasional messages, careful in tone, never asking for more than she was willing to give. They didn't push to see Lucas and Lily. They didn't demand financial help. Whether their behavior was a sign of true change or merely exhaustion, Anna chose not to dwell on it. She was no longer waiting for them to become the parents she had once needed. Lucas and Lily thrived in a home that was stable and safe, surrounded by people who loved them without conditions. They never felt like obligations, never had to prove their worth in order to be cherished. They laughed freely, unaware of the years their mother had spent chasing love that had never truly been there. One evening, Anna sat on the back porch, watching as the twins ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter ringing through the air. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the yard, and for the first time in years, she felt a deep and lasting peace. She had once believed freedom was something she had to earn, that it would only come once she had proven herself worthy of love and acceptance. Now she understood that freedom had been hers all along. She had only needed to claim it. Some doors, she realized, were meant to stay closed, and for the first time in her life she felt truly free. In 2025, Anna's story serves as a powerful reflection on the importance of setting boundaries, prioritizing self-worth, and redefining family beyond blood ties. In a world where emotional manipulation often disguises itself as familial duty, Anna's journey is a lesson in choosing mental and emotional well-being over toxic obligations. As society becomes more aware of generational trauma and the impact of unhealthy family dynamics, her decision to walk away from those who took her for granted is more relevant than ever. Many people still struggle with the belief that they must endure mistreatment simply because it comes from family. Anna's story challenges that mindset, proving that love should be unconditional, not transactional. One of the key takeaways from Anna's journey is the necessity of accountability and action over empty apologies. While her parents express regret, it is clear that regret alone is not enough to mend broken relationships. In 2025, with increasing conversations around emotional intelligence and mental health, more people are recognizing that true change requires effort, not just words. Anna sets a firm but fair boundary. If her parents truly want to be in her life, they must prove they have changed. This approach is a valuable lesson in personal growth. Not all apologies require forgiveness, and not all forgiveness requires reconnection. Another crucial aspect of the story is breaking free from financial and emotional dependence. Anna had spent years supporting her parents, allowing them to live comfortably at her own expense. In today's world where financial independence is a growing challenge, her decision to stop enabling their irresponsibility and reclaim her resources is both empowering and necessary. It highlights the importance of recognizing when help becomes an obligation rather than an act of love. Ultimately, Anna's story is about choosing a better future, even when it means leaving the past behind. By focusing on her children and surrounding herself with people who genuinely support and respect her, she proves that real family is built through love and care, not just genetics. As more people in 2025 seek healthier relationships and distance themselves from toxic influences, her journey serves as a reminder that walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. Anna's story teaches us that true freedom comes not from seeking approval, but from choosing peace. Anna's story is one of strength, resilience, and breaking free from a lifetime of emotional manipulation. She spent years being treated as an afterthought, carrying the financial and emotional burdens of parents who never truly valued her. But when she finally stood her ground, she chose herself and her children over the cycle of guilt and obligation. Now, with her parents expressing regret and asking for a second chance, the question remains, should she give them one? Her boundaries are firm. She refuses to let her children be exposed to the same neglect she endured. She knows that apologies without actions mean nothing. But deep down, a part of her wonders, is real change possible? Do people like her parents who have spent a lifetime taking truly learn to give? Now we turn to you. If you were in Anna's position, would you let your parents slowly earn back their place in your life? Or would you keep them at a distance, knowing that some people never truly change? Should Anna allow limited contact? Or is it time to close the door for good? Comment below and tell us. What should Anna do next? Should she protect the peace she's built? Or take the risk of opening her heart again? Your thoughts matter. Help guide Anna's next step.